He tried to take me by force. I refused to go with him when my daughter sent me the note. He lies. During school pickup. The moment I saw those 2 words scribbled on that crumpled piece of paper, my entire world shifted. Everything I thought I knew about trust, about safety, about the people closest to me, crumbled in an instant. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because what happened that Tuesday afternoon at Riverside Elementary would haunt me for months to come. My name is Sarah, and I'm 38 years old. I work as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company in Portland, Oregon. Single mother to Emma, my brilliant 9-year-old daughter who has this uncanny ability to see through people in ways that sometimes frighten me. I never imagined that her perceptiveness would one day save us both from something I still struggle to fully comprehend. It was October 15th, and the Pacific Northwest was living up to its reputation. Rain drummed steadily against the windshield of my Honda Civic as I sat in the school pickup line, watching parents hurry across the wet asphalt with their umbrellas turned inside out by the wind. The Douglas firs that lined the school property swayed dramatically, their branches heavy with moisture. This was the kind of weather that made Portland feel both cozy and slightly ominous, depending on your mood. I checked my phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. 3:27. Emma's class would be dismissed any moment now. I had 15 minutes before my next conference call with a client in New York, just enough time to get her home and settled with her homework. Our routine was predictable, comfortable even. Pick up Emma, quick snack, homework at the kitchen table while I finished work calls, then dinner, and whatever Netflix show we were binge-watching together that week. The school doors opened, and children began streaming out in their colorful rain jackets and backpacks. I spotted Emma immediately. She was hard to miss with her bright yellow raincoat, and the way she always walked with purpose, never dawdling like some of the other kids. She scanned the pickup area until she found my car, then started walking toward me with that focused expression she wore when something was on her mind. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man I recognized but hadn't expected to see. David Martinez, my neighbor from 2 houses down. He was probably in his early 40s, tall and lean with graying temples that gave him a distinguished look. David had moved to our street about 8 months ago, right after his divorce. He was friendly enough, the kind of neighbor who waved when he saw you checking the mail, and offered to help when you were struggling with grocery bags. Emma seemed to like him, which was saying something since she was typically shy around adults she didn't know well. What struck me as odd was that David was walking directly toward my car with Emma, as if they had planned to meet. I rolled down my window as they approached, rain immediately spattering the interior of my car. "Hey there, Sarah," David called out, his voice carrying that easy confidence I'd noticed during our brief conversations over the past few months. "I hope you don't mind, but I offered to give Emma a ride home today. Save you the trouble of waiting in this weather." I felt my stomach tighten, though I couldn't immediately identify why. There was nothing inherently wrong with his offer. David seemed like a decent guy, and it wasn't unusual for neighbors to help each other out. But something felt off. Emma hadn't mentioned anything about David picking her up, and more importantly, she hadn't gotten in his car. Instead, she was standing by my passenger door, her small hand resting on the door handle. "That's very kind of you, David. But Emma and I have our routine," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Besides, I'm already here." David's smile remained in place, but I noticed something shift in his eyes. Of course. I just thought it might be easier. The weather's getting worse, and I know how busy you are with work. Emma mentioned you had an important call this afternoon." That detail stopped me cold. Emma knew about my 3:30 call, but how would David know that? I glanced at my daughter, who was now looking between David and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was tension in her small shoulders, and she was gripping the door handle more tightly than necessary. "Emma, honey, get in the car," I said, unlocking the doors. But before Emma could move, David stepped closer to my window. His proximity felt invasive, and I had to resist the urge to roll the window back up. "Sarah, I really think it would be better if Emma came with me today. I have some things I'd like to discuss with you, and it might be easier to talk without her around." The rain was coming down harder now, creating a curtain of water that seemed to isolate us from the other parents and children still making their way to cars. David's suggestion hung in the air between us, and I felt that familiar maternal instinct kick in, the one that had kept Emma and me safe through 2 years of single parenthood. "I appreciate the offer, but no thank you," I said firmly. "Emma, get in now." My daughter didn't hesitate this time. She yanked open the passenger door and slid into her seat, immediately reaching for her seatbelt. But as she did, I noticed her slip something into my hand. A small piece of paper, folded several times and slightly damp from the rain. David's expression darkened slightly, though he maintained his smile. "Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Emma and I have been talking, and she's expressed some concerns about your ability to take care of her properly. I think it would be in everyone's best interest if she came with me today so we can sort this out." My blood ran cold. The casual way he spoke about my daughter's concerns, as if they were having ongoing conversations about my parenting, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Emma was many things: perceptive, sometimes stubborn, occasionally dramatic about bedtimes and vegetables, but she had never expressed any concerns about our home life to outsiders. "I don't know what kind of conversations you think you've been having with my daughter, but this is completely inappropriate," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Emma is coming home with me, and I'd appreciate it if you'd step away from my car." David's facade finally cracked. The friendly neighbor mask slipped, revealing something darker underneath. "I'm afraid I can't let you take her, Sarah. For her own safety." Those words hit me like a physical blow. The implications were staggering. Was he threatening to call child services? Did he genuinely believe Emma was in danger? Or was this something else entirely? I looked down at the piece of paper Emma had pressed into my hand and quickly unfolded it. In her careful 9-year-old handwriting, she had written 2 words that made my heart skip a beat. "He lies." The simplicity of the message was devastating in its clarity. Whatever David had been telling me, whatever concerns he claimed Emma had shared with him, my daughter was warning me not to believe any of it. Emma was many things, but she wasn't a liar. If she said David was lying, then David was lying. "Emma, are you okay?" I asked, turning to look at my daughter directly. She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "I want to go home, Mom. Please." That was all I needed to hear. I put the car in drive and looked back at David, who was still standing uncomfortably close to my window. "We're leaving now. Please move away from my car." But David didn't move. Instead, he reached for my door handle. "I can't let you do that, Sarah. Emma needs help, and you're not providing it." The audacity of his statement, combined with his attempt to physically prevent us from leaving, triggered something primal in me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a well-meaning neighbor overstepping boundaries. This was something much more dangerous. "Get away from my car right now, or I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone with one hand while keeping the other on the steering wheel. David's eyes flicked to my phone, then back to my face. For a moment I thought he might back down, but instead, he doubled down on whatever delusion was driving his behavior. "The police won't help you, Sarah. I've already been in touch with them about Emma's situation. They know about the neglect, the inappropriate men you bring around, the drinking. They're expecting my call." Each accusation felt like a slap. Neglect? I worked my tail off to provide for Emma. Inappropriate men? I hadn't dated anyone seriously since Emma's father left when she was 2. Drinking? I had maybe 2 glasses of wine per month, usually while Emma was asleep and I was catching up on work emails. But the specificity of his lies was what truly terrified me. These weren't random accusations. They were calculated, designed to paint a picture of an unfit mother. David had clearly been planning this for some time, building a narrative that would justify whatever he was trying to do. "None of that is true, and you know it," I said, my voice shaking with a combination of fear and rage. "I don't know what your problem is, but you need to get help." David leaned down so his face was level with my window. The rain had plastered his hair to his head, and water dripped from his chin onto my door frame. "The only person who needs help is Emma, and I'm going to make sure she gets it." He reached for the door handle again, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I pressed down on the accelerator and pulled away from the curb, forcing David to jump back to avoid being hit. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the rain, watching us drive away. He didn't look angry or frustrated. He looked determined, and that scared me more than anything else. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked quietly. I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm okay, sweetheart. We're okay." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. We had just encountered something that challenged everything I thought I knew about safety. about community, about the people we trust to live next to our children. David Martinez wasn't just an overly concerned neighbor. He was something else entirely. And the note Emma had slipped me suggested she had been dealing with his attention for longer than I had realized. As we drove through the winding streets of our neighborhood, past the craftsman-style houses with their carefully maintained gardens and the towering evergreens that made Portland feel like a fairy tale most days, I tried to process what had just happened. The familiar sights that usually made me feel grateful for the life Emma and I had built together now felt ominous, as if every shadow could be hiding a threat. "Emma, honey, I need you to tell me about your conversations with David," I said as gently as I could manage. "When did you start talking to him?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out the passenger window at the rain-soaked streets. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "He started walking with me after school sometimes, just from the building to the pickup area. He said he wanted to make sure I was safe." My stomach dropped. "How long has this been going on?" "Maybe 2 weeks. He seemed nice at first. He asked about school and about you, but then he started asking weird questions." "What kind of weird questions?" Emma shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Like, are you sad a lot? Do you drink grown-up drinks during the day? Do strange men come to our house?" I told him no, but he kept asking the same things over and over, like he wanted me to change my answers. The methodical nature of David's questioning made my skin crawl. He had been grooming my daughter, not for anything sexual necessarily, but to validate a narrative he was constructing about our family. The patience and calculation it must have taken to build trust with Emma, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for his accusations, was deeply disturbing. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" I asked, trying to keep any accusation out of my voice. "I thought about it," Emma said, her voice getting smaller, "but he said adults sometimes don't believe kids when they tell them things. He said if I told you about our conversations, you might get mad at him for being nice to me, and then I wouldn't have anyone to talk to if something bad happened." The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel. David had isolated Emma by making her believe that telling me about their interactions would somehow harm her or put her in danger. He had positioned himself as her protector, while simultaneously undermining her trust in me, her actual protector. "Emma, listen to me," I said, pulling into our driveway and turning off the engine. "You can always tell me anything. Always. No matter what anyone else says. I am on your side, and I will always believe you. Do you understand?" She nodded, but I could see tears forming in her eyes. "I was scared, Mom. Today, he said, maybe I should come home with him instead of you, just for today, so we could talk more. That's when I wrote the note. I remembered what you always say about trusting my gut, and my gut said something was really wrong. I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to face Emma fully. Your gut was absolutely right. You did exactly the right thing by writing that note and by getting in the car with me. I'm so proud of you for being brave and smart." We sat in the car for a few more minutes, rain drumming on the roof and creating a cocoon of sound around us. I was trying to figure out what to do next. Call the police? But David had claimed he was already in contact with them. What if he really had filed some kind of report? What if his lies had already taken root in the system designed to protect children? The thought of Child Protective Services showing up at our door, based on David's fabricated concerns, made me feel sick. I knew logically that any investigation would reveal the truth, that Emma was well cared for, happy, and safe with me, but I also knew that the system wasn't perfect, and false accusations could cause tremendous damage even when they were eventually disproven. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Emma asked, as if she could read my thoughts. "We're going to go inside, and I'm going to make some phone calls," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "We're going to figure this out together, okay?" As we hurried through the rain to our front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Our house, a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, had always felt like a sanctuary. But now, knowing that David lived just 2 houses down and had been systematically manipulating my daughter for weeks, it felt exposed and vulnerable. Inside, I helped Emma out of her wet raincoat and backpack, going through the familiar motions of our after-school routine while my mind raced. I needed to document everything that had happened, call the school to report David's inappropriate contact with Emma, and probably contact a lawyer. But first, I needed to make sure Emma felt safe. "Why don't you go upstairs and change into something dry?" I suggested. "I'll make you some hot chocolate. and then we can talk more about what happened. As Emma headed upstairs, I moved to the kitchen window that faced David's house. His dark blue sedan was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in his living room. The normalcy of it was unsettling. From the outside, he looked like any other suburban professional coming home from work on a rainy Tuesday. There was no sign of the predatory behavior I had just witnessed. I pulled out my phone and started making a list of people I needed to call. The school counselor, to report David's contact with Emma. The police, to file a report about his attempt to take Emma from school. My sister Jennifer, who was a social worker and might have advice about protecting ourselves from false accusations. And probably a lawyer, though I had no idea how to find one who specialized in this kind of situation. But before I could make the first call, my phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. Hello? Is this Sarah Mitchell? The voice was male, official sounding. Yes, this is Sarah. This is Officer Brandon Collins with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm calling about a report we received regarding your daughter Emma. Would it be possible for us to speak with you this evening? My blood turned to ice. David had followed through on his threat. Whatever lies he had told the police, they were taking them seriously enough to call me directly. What kind of report? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, ma'am. Would 7 o'clock this evening work for you? I looked at the clock on my microwave. It was 4:15. In less than 3 hours, police officers would be at my door, ready to investigate me based on the word of a man who had just tried to take my daughter by force. The irony was crushing. The very system designed to protect children from dangerous adults was being weaponized against me by a dangerous adult. Yes, 7 o'clock is fine, I said. Should I have a lawyer present? There was a slight pause. That's your right, ma'am, but this is just a preliminary conversation. We're trying to get a better understanding of the situation. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, staring out at the rain and trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken in less than an hour. This morning, my biggest concern had been whether I could finish a client presentation before Emma's soccer practice. Now I was facing a coordinated attack on my fitness as a mother, orchestrated by a neighbor I had trusted enough to exchange pleasantries with over the fence. Emma came back downstairs wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the cartoon cats that she refused to outgrow. She looked young and vulnerable, and I felt a fierce surge of protective anger toward anyone who would try to harm her or use her as a pawn in whatever sick game David was playing. Mom, you look scared, she observed with that unsettling perceptiveness that sometimes made her seem older than her 9 years. I knelt down so we were at eye level. I am a little scared, I admitted, but not of anything that's going to hurt us. I'm scared because some adults are going to come talk to us tonight, and they might ask you some questions about our family. Emma's eyes widened. Questions like David asked me? Maybe. But these adults are police officers, and their job is to make sure kids are safe. They're going to want to know the truth, and all you have to do is tell them the truth. About our life, about how I take care of you, about what David said to you. Can you do that? She nodded solemnly. Will they believe me? I think they will, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. But even if they don't at first, the truth has a way of coming out. We just have to be patient and brave. As I made Emma's hot chocolate, I thought about the note she had slipped me at school. 2 words that had potentially saved us from something much worse than a police investigation. He lies. It was such a simple assessment, but it cut through all of David's manipulation and gave me the clarity I needed to act. I realized that Emma's note represented something crucial that I would need to remember in the hours and days ahead. Sometimes the most important truths are the simplest ones, and sometimes a child's instinct is more reliable than an adult's rationalization. David lies. Whatever story he had constructed about our family, whatever evidence he claimed to have, whatever official-sounding concerns he had raised, it all came down to those 2 words. He lies. The question now was whether I could convince everyone else of that truth before his lies caused irreparable damage to our lives. As I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, frantically researching family law attorneys while Emma worked on her math homework beside me, I tried to piece together David's motivations. What could he possibly gain from targeting our family? We barely knew each other beyond neighborly waves and the occasional borrowed cup of sugar. Emma was a normal, well-adjusted kid who got good grades and had friends. I was a working mother who paid my bills on time and kept my lawn mowed. We were about as unremarkable as families come, unless that was exactly the point. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that David had chosen us precisely because we were ordinary. A single mother with no extended family nearby. A child who was naturally shy around adults. A quiet household that kept to itself. We were isolated enough to be vulnerable, but normal enough that any accusations against me would seem plausible to outsiders. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Jennifer in Seattle. "Just saw your missed calls. Everything okay?" I had forgotten that I had tried to reach her while Emma was changing clothes. My hands shook as I typed back. "Need to talk. Can you call me? Emergency." Within 30 seconds, my phone was ringing. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Jennifer's voice carried the protective urgency of an older sister who had helped raise me after our parents died in a car accident when I was in college. I explained everything. David's manipulation of Emma, his attempt to take her from school, the police call that was coming in less than 2 hours. Jennifer listened without interrupting, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I described David's specific accusations. "Those are textbook allegations," she said when I finished. "In my line of work, we see this pattern when someone is trying to build a case for emergency custody, or when they're laying groundwork for a more serious intervention." "But why?" I asked, keeping my voice low so Emma wouldn't overhear. "What could he possibly want with us?" "Sarah, I need you to think carefully about this. Has David ever shown any particular interest in Emma? Any gifts, special attention, requests to spend time with her?" The question made my stomach lurch, but I forced myself to consider it objectively. Not that I noticed, but apparently they had been talking after school for weeks without me knowing. And he specifically tried to get her to come with him today. "Away from you." "Yes." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that David's interest in your family isn't random. Men who target children often spend months grooming both the child and the situation. They create scenarios where they can appear to be rescuing the child from an unfit parent." The implications of what she was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. I had been thinking of David as a mentally unstable neighbor with some kind of savior complex. But Jennifer was suggesting something much darker, that his accusations against me were part of a calculated plan to gain access to Emma. "But he's never seemed inappropriate with her," I protested. "Emma would have told me." "Would she? You said he convinced her not to tell you about their conversations. He made her believe that telling you would somehow hurt her. That's grooming behavior, Sarah. He was isolating her from you while positioning himself as her protector." I looked across the kitchen at Emma, who was erasing something on her homework with fierce concentration. She looked so normal, so unaware of the adult conversation happening just feet away from her. The idea that someone had been systematically manipulating her, preparing her for something unspeakable, made me feel physically ill. "What do I do?" I asked Jennifer. "First, you need a lawyer. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight, before the police arrive. I'm going to call a colleague of mine who specializes in family law. Her name is Rachel Chen, and she's dealt with cases like this before." "Cases like this happen often?" "More often than you'd think. False accusations are a common tactic used by people who want to discredit parents and gain access to children. The system is designed to err on the side of caution when it comes to child safety, which makes it easy to manipulate." While Jennifer was making calls on my behalf, I focused on documenting everything I could remember about my interactions with David. When he had moved to the neighborhood, which conversations we had had, any details that might help establish a timeline of his behavior. I also started gathering evidence of Emma's well-being, recent report cards, photos from school events, medical records from her last checkup. Emma looked up from her homework. "Mom, why are you taking pictures of my report card?" I sat down beside her and chose my words carefully. "Remember how I told you some adults are coming to talk to us tonight? They're going to want to see that you're doing well in school, and that I'm taking good care of you. Like proof that David was lying?" The clarity of her understanding never ceased to amaze me. Exactly like that. What if they don't believe us? It was the question I had been trying not to think about. Then we'll keep telling the truth until they do. Sometimes it takes time for adults to understand what's really happening, especially when someone has been telling lies for a while. My phone rang again. Jennifer had gotten through to Rachel Chen, who agreed to come to the house before the police arrived. She would be there at 6:30, giving us just enough time to go over the situation before Officer Collins arrived. "Rachel said something important," Jennifer told me. "She said that in cases like this, the first 24 hours are crucial. How you handle the initial police contact can determine whether this becomes a minor investigation that gets closed quickly or a major disruption that drags on for months. What does that mean for tonight? It means you need to be cooperative, but careful. Answer their questions honestly, but don't volunteer information they don't ask for. Let Rachel guide the conversation. And whatever you do, don't let them interview Emma alone. After I hung up with Jennifer, I realized I needed to call Emma's school. If David had been approaching Emma regularly during pickup, there might be security cameras or witnesses who could corroborate her story. I also wanted to make sure the school was aware of the situation in case David tried to contact Emma there again. The school secretary transferred me to Principal Martinez, no relation to David, as she was quick to clarify when I explained the situation. She was professional but clearly concerned. "I wish Emma had reported this to one of our staff members," she said. "We have protocols in place for exactly this kind of situation." "Emma didn't realize it was inappropriate at first," I explained. "David presented himself as a concerned neighbor who was just being friendly. That's unfortunately common. Adults who target children are often very skilled at making their behavior seem normal and helpful. I'm going to check our security footage from the past few weeks and see if we can document these interactions." She also promised to flag Emma's file so that no one other than me would be authorized to pick her up from school, and to alert all staff members to watch for David on school property. By 6 o'clock, I had managed to pull together a substantial file of documentation about Emma's well-being and our family life. School records, medical records, photos from recent activities, even screenshots of my work calendar showing my consistent schedule. It felt surreal to be preparing to defend my competence as a mother to strangers, but I was determined to be thorough. Rachel Chen arrived exactly at 6:30, a petite woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of intense focus that made me feel immediately more confident. She spread her materials across my dining room table and got straight to business. "Tell me everything again, from the beginning," she said. "Don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem." As I recounted the day's events for the third time, Rachel took notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes, reviewing her notes. "This is clearly a targeted harassment campaign," she said finally. "The specificity of the accusations, the timing of the police contact, the attempt to physically remove Emma from your custody. This isn't random mental illness or misguided concern. This is calculated. My sister thinks David might be grooming Emma. That's consistent with what I'm seeing. The gradual building of trust, the isolation from you, the positioning of himself as her alternative protector. These are classic techniques used by predators." Rachel explained what would likely happen when the police arrived. They would ask questions about David's accusations, probably request to interview Emma, and possibly want to conduct a walkthrough of our home. They might also ask about my work schedule, my social life, my parenting decisions. "The most important thing is to remain calm and cooperative," she advised. "Getting defensive or angry, even when faced with outrageous lies, can make you appear unstable or guilty. Let me handle any questions that seem designed to trap you." At exactly 7 o'clock, there was a knock on our front door. Through the peephole, I could see 2 police officers standing on my porch, raindrops glistening on their dark uniforms. Officer Collins was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his 30s, with the kind of serious expression that suggested he took his job seriously. His partner was a woman, slightly older, with kind eyes that I hoped meant she had experience dealing with families in crisis. "Good evening, Ms. Mitchell. I'm Officer Collins, and this is Officer Sarah Thompson. We spoke on the phone earlier." I introduced Rachel as my attorney, which seemed to shift the dynamic slightly. The officers became more formal, more careful with their words. "We're here to follow up on a report we received about concerns regarding your daughter Emma's welfare," Officer Collins explained as we settled in my living room. "We'd like to ask you some questions and speak with Emma as well." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Before we begin, could you share the nature of the specific concerns that were reported?" Officer Thompson consulted her notebook. "The report alleges that Emma Mitchell is being neglected by her mother. Specifically, that she's often left unsupervised, that there's excessive alcohol consumption in the home, and that inappropriate men are frequently present around the child." Hearing David's lies repeated by a police officer in my own living room was devastating, even though I had been expecting them. The clinical way Officer Thompson recited the accusations made them sound official, documented, real. "Who made this report?" Rachel asked. "David Martinez, a neighbor." Officer Collins replied. He claims to have observed these conditions over several months and says he's spoken with Emma directly about her home situation. And what did Emma allegedly tell him? Officer Thompson flipped through her notes. According to Mr. Martinez, Emma expressed concerns about her mother's drinking, said she was often scared at night when men came to visit, and indicated that she wished she had somewhere else to stay. The fabrication was so complete, so detailed, that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. Had Emma really said these things? Was I somehow failing her in ways I couldn't see? But then I remembered the note. He lies. Officer Thompson, I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. None of those things are true. Emma has never expressed any concerns about our home to me or to anyone else as far as I know. I don't drink excessively. I might have a glass of wine with dinner once or twice a month. And there are no men visiting our home. I haven't dated anyone seriously since Emma's father left 7 years ago. We understand this must be difficult to hear, Officer Collins said. That's why we're here to get your side of the story. Can you tell us about your relationship with Mr. Martinez? I explained about David moving to the neighborhood, our limited interactions, and the concerning events of the afternoon. Rachel occasionally prompted me to include specific details or to clarify timeline issues. When I described David's attempt to take Emma from school, both officers sat up straighter. He physically tried to prevent you from leaving with your daughter, Officer Thompson asked. He stood in front of my car door and told me he couldn't let me take her. He claimed it was for Emma's safety, but Emma clearly wanted to come home with me. She even passed me a note warning me not to trust him. Do you still have this note? I retrieved the crumpled piece of paper with Emma's handwriting and showed it to the officers. Officer Thompson examined it carefully and made a note in her file. We'd like to speak with Emma now, Officer Collins said, just to get her perspective on the situation. Rachel intervened. Emma is 9 years old and has had a traumatic day. If you need to interview her, I'd prefer that Ms. Mitchell be present and that we keep the questions age-appropriate and brief. The officers agreed, and I called Emma downstairs. She appeared in her pajamas, looking small and uncertain. I guided her to sit beside me on the couch, close enough that she could feel my presence, but not so close that it looked like I was coaching her. Officer Thompson took the lead, her voice gentle and reassuring. Hi, Emma. I'm Officer Thompson. We just want to ask you a few questions about your home and school, okay? Emma nodded, glancing between the officers and me. Can you tell me how you feel about living here with your mom? I like it, Emma said simply. Mom takes good care of me. Do you ever feel scared or unsafe at home? No. Well, sometimes during thunderstorms, but Mom lets me sleep in her room when that happens. Officer Thompson smiled. That sounds like what a good mom would do. Emma, do you know a man named David Martinez? Emma's posture stiffened slightly. He's our neighbor. Have you talked to David before? Yes. He walks with me sometimes after school. What do you talk about? Emma looked at me, then back at Officer Thompson. He asks me questions about Mom, like if she's sad, or if she drinks grown-up drinks, or if strangers come to our house. And what do you tell him? I tell him no, because those things aren't true. But he keeps asking the same questions like he wants me to say yes. Officer Collins leaned forward. Emma, did David ever make you feel uncomfortable? Today he did. He said I should go home with him instead of Mom, and it felt wrong. That's why I wrote the note. What note? Emma looked at me for permission, and I nodded. I wrote he lies and gave it to Mom because David was saying things that weren't true about us. The officers exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. Officer Thompson made several notes, then asked a few more questions about Emma's school performance, her friends, and her daily routine. Emma answered everything honestly and confidently, painting a picture of a normal, well-adjusted child who was loved and cared for. After the interview, the officers asked to see the rest of the house. Rachel accompanied us as we walked through each room, and I was grateful for the time I had spent that afternoon cleaning and organizing. Emma's bedroom was tidy and age-appropriate, with bookshelves full of chapter books and art projects displayed on the walls. My bedroom was unremarkable. A queen-sized bed, a dresser, a nightstand with a lamp and a few books. The kitchen was the room I was most worried about, since that's where I kept my small wine collection. But the officers barely glanced at the rack that held 6 bottles, most of them gifts from coworkers or clients. Ms. Mitchell, Officer Collins said as we concluded the walkthrough, based on what we've seen and heard tonight, we don't find evidence to support the allegations that were made. Emma appears to be well cared for and happy, and your home environment seems stable and appropriate. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but Rachel placed a subtle hand on my arm, reminding me to stay composed. However, Officer Thompson continued, we are concerned about Mr. Martinez's behavior toward Emma, approaching a child repeatedly without parental knowledge or consent, attempting to isolate her from her parent, and making false reports to authorities are all serious issues. What happens next? I asked. We'll be having a conversation with Mr. Martinez about his conduct, Officer Collins said. We'll also be filing a report about today's incident at the school. If he continues to harass you or Emma, or if he makes any further false reports, he could face charges for filing a false police report and potentially stalking. After the officers left, I felt simultaneously relieved and exhausted. The immediate crisis had passed, but I knew this was far from over. David's lies had been exposed, but that didn't mean he would simply give up and leave us alone. Rachel helped me understand what to expect in the coming days. The police report would become part of the official record, which would actually work in our favor if David tried to make future accusations. The school would be monitoring Emma's safety, and I now had documentation of David's inappropriate behavior. The most important thing is that Emma handled herself beautifully tonight, Rachel said as she packed up her materials. Her testimony was clear, consistent, and age-appropriate. If this situation escalates, she's shown that she can articulate what happened without being coached or manipulated. After Rachel left, I sat with Emma on the couch, both of us still processing the surreal events of the day. Are we in trouble? Emma asked. No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. The police officers could see that David was lying about us. What's going to happen to David? It was a complicated question. The police are going to talk to him about why it's not okay to lie about families or to try to take children away from their parents. Emma was quiet for a moment. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't tell you about David earlier. I pulled her closer to me. You have nothing to apologize for. David is a grown-up who should have known better. It's not your job to protect us from other adults. It's my job to protect you. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, I realized that we had survived something that could have destroyed our family. David's calculated attack had failed, but only because Emma had trusted her instincts, and because we had acted quickly to defend ourselves. The simple note she had written, "He lies," had been our salvation. In a world where adults often complicate the truth with explanations and justifications and rationalizations, sometimes the most powerful response is the most direct one. David Martinez was a liar, and now everyone knew it. I thought the worst was behind us. The police had seen through David's lies. Emma was safe, and we had legal documentation of his harassment. But I underestimated the depth of his obsession and the lengths he would go to achieve whatever twisted goal he had set for our family. The first sign that David wasn't going to simply disappear came 3 days after the police visit. I was making coffee before work when I noticed something white tucked under my windshield wiper. My stomach clenched as I approached my car, remembering Emma's warning note and wondering what new manipulation David had devised. It was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. "You can't protect her forever. I'm watching." The words were simple, but their implication was terrifying. David was escalating from false accusations to direct threats. I immediately called Officer Thompson, who advised me to document everything and assured me they would increase patrols in our neighborhood. But documentation felt inadequate against the growing sense that David was always nearby, always watching. I started noticing his car parked at different locations around our neighborhood during times when he should have been at work. I caught glimpses of him at the grocery store, always seeming to be in whatever aisle Emma and I were shopping in. When I picked Emma up from soccer practice, I spotted him sitting in his car across the street from the athletic fields. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and exhausting. David was careful never to approach us directly or do anything that could be clearly documented as harassment, but his presence was constant, a reminder that he considered himself part of our lives whether we wanted him there or not. Emma began having nightmares. She would wake up in the middle of the night, crying about dreams where strangers were trying to take her away from me. During the day, she became clingy and anxious, constantly checking to make sure I was nearby. Her teacher at school noticed the change in her behavior and asked if everything was okay at home. I tried to maintain normalcy while secretly researching security systems and considering whether we should move to a different neighborhood. But moving felt like letting David win, and I wasn't sure it would solve the problem anyway. If he was truly obsessed with Emma, distance might not deter him. The breaking point came on a Friday evening 2 weeks after the police visit. Emma and I were at the downtown farmers market, something we did most Friday evenings when the weather was nice. Portland's farmers market was one of our favorite places. Rows of vendors selling fresh produce, artisanal breads, and handmade crafts, all set against the backdrop of the Willamette River and the city skyline. Emma was examining a display of colorful honey varieties when I noticed a familiar figure browsing the organic vegetable stand about 30 feet away. David was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, but I recognized his height and the way he carried himself. He was pretending to shop while clearly watching us. I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of leaving the market or trying to avoid him, I walked directly toward David's location. Emma, confused by the sudden change in direction, hurried to keep up with me. "Mom, where are we going?" she asked. "I need to talk to someone," I said, keeping my voice calm, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. David noticed me approaching and tried to move away, but I was faster and more determined. The vendors and other shoppers provided witnesses, which gave me confidence that he wouldn't try anything dramatic in such a public setting. "David," I called out loudly enough that several people turned to look. "We need to talk." He stopped walking and turned around slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance to something that looked almost like amusement. "Sarah, what a coincidence seeing you here." "It's not a coincidence and you know it," I said, positioning myself between David and Emma. "You've been following us for weeks." "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, but his smirk betrayed his words. "Portland isn't that big. People run into each other." Several shoppers had slowed their browsing to listen to our conversation. David seemed to realize that his usual manipulation tactics wouldn't work with an audience of strangers who had no investment in believing his lies. "You left a threatening note on my car," I said. "You've been watching our house, following us to stores, showing up at Emma's activities. This is stalking and it needs to stop." David's facade cracked completely. The friendly neighbor mask disappeared, replaced by cold anger. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sarah. Emma deserves better than what you can give her." "And you think you can give her better?" I asked, loud enough that the growing crowd of onlookers could hear every word. "By lying to police? By manipulating a 9-year-old child? By threatening her mother?" "I was trying to help her," David said, his voice rising. "She's being neglected, and you're too selfish to see it." A woman in her 60s who had been shopping for tomatoes stepped closer. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" she asked, looking directly at David with obvious concern. The intervention of a stranger seemed to snap David back to awareness of his surroundings. He looked around at the faces watching him, concerned parents, protective community members, people who were clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. "This is a private family matter," he said, trying to regain his composure. "No, it's not," I replied firmly. "This man has been harassing my daughter and me for weeks. He made false reports to police. He tried to take my daughter from school without permission, and he's been stalking us." The woman who had initially spoken pulled out her phone. "Should I call the police?" David's eyes darted between the woman's phone and the crowd of people who were now openly staring at him. The public exposure of his behavior seemed to affect him more than anything the police had said or done. His carefully constructed image as a concerned neighbor was crumbling in real time. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," he said quietly, but his words carried a menace that made Emma press closer to my side. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," I said, with a conviction I hadn't known I possessed. "If you come near my daughter or me again, if you contact us in any way, if you so much as drive down our street, I will have you arrested. Do you understand me?" David stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The calculated predator was being replaced by something more desperate and unpredictable. He was losing control of the situation he had so carefully orchestrated, and that made him dangerous in a different way. Without another word, he turned and walked quickly toward the market exit, leaving behind a crowd of concerned strangers and a mother who had finally found her voice. The woman with the phone approached me as David disappeared into the parking area. "Are you okay, honey? Do you want me to call the police anyway?" "I think it would be a good idea," I said, realizing I was shaking from adrenaline. "This has been going on for weeks, and I want there to be a record of what just happened." As we waited for the police to arrive, several other market patrons came forward to offer support and to share what they had witnessed. A young father said he would be happy to provide a statement about David's threatening behavior. An older man mentioned that he had seen David following us through the market before we confronted him. The response from the community was overwhelming and reassuring. These strangers had no reason to get involved in our situation, but they recognized predatory behavior when they saw it and were willing to stand up against it. Officer Thompson arrived within 15 minutes, and I was grateful to see a familiar face. She took statements from me, from Emma, and from several witnesses who had observed the confrontation. The consensus was clear. David had been exhibiting stalking behavior and had made threatening statements in front of multiple witnesses. "This changes things significantly," Officer Thompson told me as she finished taking notes. The previous incident could be explained away as a misunderstanding or poor judgment, but this pattern of behavior, combined with the threatening note and tonight's public confrontation, gives us grounds for a restraining order. The legal protection felt important, but I knew that a piece of paper wouldn't necessarily stop someone who had already shown such disregard for boundaries and appropriate behavior. Still, it was a tool we could use, and it would create serious legal consequences if David violated it. As Emma and I drove home from the farmer's market, I felt a strange mixture of empowerment and vulnerability. Standing up to David publicly had felt incredibly liberating, but it had also stripped away any pretense that this was a manageable situation. David's final words, "This isn't over," echoed in my mind, and I knew we were entering a more dangerous phase of his obsession. "Mom, why was David so angry?" Emma asked as we pulled into our driveway. "Because he's been trying to control our family, and today everyone could see that what he's doing is wrong," I explained. "Sometimes when people are caught doing bad things, they get angry instead of sorry." "Are we safe?" It was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. "We're going to be safer now," I said carefully. "The police know what's happening, and other people saw David being inappropriate tonight. That makes it harder for him to hurt us." But even as I said the words, I noticed David's house was dark, except for a single light, in what I assumed was his bedroom. I wondered what he was thinking, what he was planning, whether the public humiliation would deter him or push him toward more desperate measures. I spent most of that night researching home security options and making lists of additional precautions we could take. Motion sensor lights for the yard, security cameras for the front and back doors, upgraded locks on all windows. I also started looking into self-defense classes and considering whether I should apply for a concealed carry permit. The restraining order was approved the following Monday. The judge reviewed the police reports, the witness statements from the farmer's market, and the threatening note David had left on my car. The order prohibited David from coming within 500 feet of Emma, or me, from contacting us directly or indirectly, and from being on school property during pickup and drop-off times. Serving the restraining order should have felt like a victory, but instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. David's response to legal boundaries would determine whether this situation would finally end or escalate into something even more serious. The answer came 2 days later. I was working from home on Wednesday afternoon, taking advantage of Emma's after-school program to catch up on client presentations, when I heard glass breaking in the back of the house. At first, I thought a bird had flown into one of the sliding doors that led to our small backyard patio. But the sound was too loud, too deliberate. I grabbed my phone and moved carefully toward the back of the house, staying low and trying to see outside without exposing myself to whoever might be out there. The sliding door to the patio was intact, but I could see that one of the smaller windows near the laundry room had been shattered. My first instinct was to call the police, but before I could dial, I heard footsteps on the wooden deck that ran along the back of the house. Someone was walking slowly, deliberately, as if they had every right to be there. I crept to the edge of the kitchen window and peered out carefully. David was standing on my back deck, staring directly at the broken window he had just created. In his hand was a rock about the size of a baseball, and his expression was blank, almost serene. This was the moment I had been dreading, the escalation from psychological harassment to actual breaking and entering. David had crossed a line that meant he was no longer concerned about legal consequences or social judgment. He was operating from pure obsession now, and that made him unpredictable and extremely dangerous. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers, whispering my address and the emergency into the phone while keeping my eyes on David. The dispatcher asked if I was in immediate danger, and I told her that someone was actively breaking into my house in violation of a restraining order. "Ma'am, are you able to get to a safe location within the house?" the dispatcher asked. "I'm in the kitchen. He's on the back deck," I can see him through the window. Do not approach the intruder. Stay on the line with me. Officers are en route. David seemed to be in no hurry. He examined the broken window like a contractor assessing a repair job, then began walking around the deck, peering into other windows. When he reached the sliding door that led to our living room, he tried the handle. It was locked, but I realized with growing terror that David wasn't necessarily trying to get inside the house. He was trying to terrorize me. He knew I was home, knew I was watching him, knew I was probably calling the police. This wasn't a burglary or a crime of opportunity. This was psychological warfare taken to its ultimate conclusion. He wanted me to know that he could reach me anytime he wanted, that restraining orders and police reports were meaningless against his determination to insert himself into our lives. "Ma'am, are you still there?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes, I'm here." He's walking around the back deck, looking in windows. He knows I'm watching him. Help is almost there. Continue to stay away from the windows and doors. But I couldn't look away. David's calm demeanor was more frightening than if he had been raging or acting erratically. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated intimidation by someone who had completely lost touch with reality and social boundaries. When David reached the window of Emma's bedroom, my maternal instincts overrode my fear. The idea of him looking into my daughter's private space, imagining her sleeping there, planning whatever sick fantasy he had developed around our family, was unbearable. I stopped thinking strategically and started thinking like a mother whose child was being threatened. "Get away from her window," I shouted, no longer caring whether he knew exactly where I was in the house. David turned toward the sound of my voice and smiled. It was a cold, satisfied expression that confirmed my worst fears about his intentions. He raised the rock in his hand and pointed it toward Emma's window, not as a threat to break it, but as a reminder that he could. That gesture, pointing a rock at my daughter's bedroom window while smiling at me, shattered something fundamental in my psyche. All the weeks of trying to handle this situation calmly and legally, all the attempts to protect Emma without traumatizing her, all the faith I had placed in systems and procedures to keep us safe, evaporated in that moment. I grabbed the largest kitchen knife from the wooden block on my counter and headed for the back door. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" the dispatcher asked, apparently hearing my movement through the phone. "He's threatening my daughter's bedroom. I'm not letting him do this anymore." "Ma'am, please stay inside. Officers are pulling up to your house right now." Through the front windows, I could see the flashing lights of police cars arriving in my driveway. But David was still on my back deck, still pointing that rock at Emma's window, still wearing that satisfied smile that said he was getting exactly the reaction he wanted. I unlocked the sliding door and stepped onto the deck. "Get off my property," I said, holding the knife at my side but making sure David could see it. "Get away from my daughter's window and get off my property right now." David's smile widened. "There's the real Sarah Mitchell. Not the composed single mother act you put on for the police. This is who you really are. Unstable, violent, exactly the kind of person who shouldn't be raising a child." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Even while trespassing on my property in violation of a restraining order, even while terrorizing my family and threatening my home, David was trying to position my defensive response as evidence of my unfitness as a mother. "The only unstable person here is you," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "You're obsessed with a 9-year-old child. You've been stalking us for weeks, and now you're breaking into our house. The police are here, David. It's over." As if summoned by my words, Officer Collins appeared around the corner of the house, his weapon drawn and pointed at David. "Drop the rock and put your hands where I can see them." David looked back and forth between Officer Collins and me, and for a moment, I thought he might refuse to comply. The rock was still in his hand, and I could see him calculating whether he could throw it at the window before the officer could stop him. "Drop it now," Officer Collins commanded. Finally, David opened his hand and let the rock fall to the deck. It hit the wooden planks with a solid thunk that seemed to break the spell of the confrontation. Officer Collins moved quickly to restrain David while additional officers secured the scene. "Ma'am, please put the knife down and step back into the house," Officer Collins called to me. I realized I was still holding the kitchen knife and had been unconsciously gripping it tighter as the confrontation escalated. I set it down on the patio table and backed toward the sliding door, my hands shaking as the adrenaline began to wear off. Within minutes, my backyard was full of police officers, crime scene technicians, and detectives. David was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. but not before he made one final attempt to manipulate the situation. "Officer, you need to check on the child," he called out as they loaded him into the car. "Sarah just threatened me with a knife in front of witnesses. Emma isn't safe in that house. Even in custody, even caught red-handed violating a restraining order and destroying property, David was still trying to position himself as Emma's protector and me as the threat. The persistence of his delusion was staggering. Officer Thompson arrived as the scene was being processed and took my statement about what had happened. I explained David's behavior, the broken window, his threatening gesture toward Emma's bedroom, and my decision to confront him when I felt he was directly threatening my daughter. "You're not in any trouble," Officer Thompson assured me. "You were defending your home and your child against someone who was violating a restraining order. But in the future, please let us handle situations like this. David clearly wanted to provoke a reaction from you, and confronting him could have made things much worse." I knew she was right, but I also knew that in that moment, seeing David point that rock at Emma's window, I would have done anything to protect my daughter. The maternal instinct had overridden every other consideration, and I didn't regret it. As the police finished their work and David was taken away in the patrol car, I began the process of calling a glass repair company and documenting the damage for insurance purposes. The broken window could be fixed within a few days, but the psychological impact of David's escalation would take much longer to address. Emma came home from after-school care to find our house surrounded by police tape and glass scattered across the laundry room floor. I had asked Officer Thompson to stay until Emma arrived so that she could explain what had happened in age-appropriate terms. "Emma, someone broke one of your windows today while you were at school," Officer Thompson explained gently. "It was David, the neighbor who was bothering you before, but he's been arrested now, and he won't be able to bother you anymore." Emma looked at the broken glass, then at me, then back at Officer Thompson. "Is he going to jail?" "Yes, he's going to jail. What he did today was a serious crime, and he'll be punished for it." That evening, after the glass was cleaned up and a temporary board was installed over the broken window, Emma and I sat on the couch and talked about what had happened. She had handled the entire situation with remarkable maturity, but I could see the stress in her small shoulders and the way she kept checking the windows to make sure they were locked. "Mom, why did David want to hurt us so much?" she asked. It was a question I had been asking myself for weeks without finding a satisfactory answer. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that some adults become obsessed with controlling people they barely know? How do you describe the mindset of someone who constructs elaborate justifications for stalking and harassment? "I think David is very sick in his mind," I said finally. "He convinced himself that we needed his help, even though we didn't. When we showed him that we were fine without him, he got angry and started doing dangerous things. Like breaking our window? Like breaking our window." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this explanation. "I'm glad I wrote that note," she said. "Which note?" "The one that said, 'He lies.' If I hadn't written that, you might have believed him when he said those bad things about us." I pulled Emma closer to me, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom of her observation. In all the complexity of legal proceedings and psychological analysis and security measures, the most important truth remained the one my 9-year-old daughter had recognized immediately. David Martinez was a liar. Everything else, the false accusations, the manipulation, the stalking, the break-in, all stemmed from that fundamental dishonesty. Emma had seen through it from the beginning, and her 2-word warning had been the foundation of everything that followed. "You saved us, sweetheart," I told her. "Your note saved our whole family." The legal proceedings moved quickly after David's arrest. Violating a restraining order, criminal trespass, destruction of property, and stalking charges meant he was facing serious jail time. His attempt to portray himself as a concerned neighbor fell apart completely when investigators found evidence of his obsessive behavior. During a search of his house, police discovered dozens of photographs of Emma and me taken without our knowledge. Pictures of us at the grocery store, at Emma's soccer games, walking to and from our car. He had been documenting our daily routines with the kind of detail that suggested he was planning something far more serious than harassment. They also found a notebook filled with detailed observations about our family. Our schedules, Emma's school activities, my work patterns, even notes about what we wore on different days. The scope of his surveillance was staggering and deeply disturbing. Most chilling was a series of documents David had prepared that outlined his plan to gain custody of Emma. He had researched family law, identified strategies for proving parental unfitness, and even drafted a petition that positioned him as a concerned community member seeking to protect a neglected child. The notebook revealed that David's harassment wasn't random or impulsive. It was a calculated campaign designed to discredit me as a mother and create opportunities for him to insert himself into Emma's life. The false police reports, the manipulation, even the break-in were all part of a long-term strategy that he had been planning for months. David pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. The plea agreement included a permanent restraining order and a requirement that he undergo psychological evaluation and treatment. At the sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to read a victim impact statement. I had debated whether to attend at all, but ultimately decided that David needed to hear directly from us about the damage his obsession had caused. "Your Honor," I began, looking directly at David as I spoke. "This man spent months terrorizing my family based on fantasies he created about our lives. He manipulated my 9-year-old daughter, made false reports to police, stalked us throughout our community, and ultimately broke into our home. The psychological impact of his actions will affect my daughter and me for years to come." David stared at the table in front of him throughout my statement, never once looking up to acknowledge the harm he had caused. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence and legal consequences, he seemed incapable of accepting responsibility for his actions. "But I want the court to know," I continued, "that my daughter showed incredible bravery throughout this ordeal. She recognized David's lies from the beginning, and her courage in warning me about his behavior ultimately protected our family. She is stronger because of what we survived together." As we left the courthouse after David's sentencing, Emma slipped her hand into mine. "Is it really over now, Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart. It's really over." The healing process took time, but gradually Emma's nightmares faded, and her anxiety decreased. We installed a security system and made some changes to our daily routines, but we didn't let David's obsession fundamentally alter the life we had built together. 6 months later, we were back at the farmer's market, enjoying the same Friday evening tradition that David had tried to steal from us. As we browsed the vendor stalls and selected fresh produce for the week, I thought about the journey we had taken from that first concerning conversation at school pickup to this moment of reclaimed normalcy. Emma stopped at the honey vendor we had been visiting when David first confronted us publicly. "Mom, remember when we saw David here, and you told him to leave us alone?" "I remember. You were really brave that day." "We were both brave," I corrected her. "You were brave from the very beginning, when you wrote that note warning me about David. You trusted your instincts even when an adult was trying to convince you not to." Emma selected a jar of wildflower honey and handed it to the vendor. As we completed the purchase, I realized that this simple transaction represented something profound: the restoration of our right to exist peacefully in our own community, to shop and go about our daily lives without fear or surveillance. David Martinez had tried to rewrite our story, to cast himself as the hero and me as the villain in a narrative that existed only in his disturbed imagination. But Emma's simple note, "He lies," had cut through all of his manipulation and revealed the truth that would ultimately protect us. Sometimes the most powerful weapons against complex deceptions are the simplest truths, spoken by the people who have the least to gain from dishonesty. A 9-year-old girl's instinctive recognition that an adult was lying had been more accurate than weeks of investigation and analysis. As we walked back to our car with our farmer's market purchases, Emma looked up at me with the kind of easy confidence that I had feared might be permanently damaged by David's harassment. "Mom, what should we make with the honey?" "Whatever you want, sweetheart. We have all the time in the world to decide." And for the first time in months, that felt completely true. We had our time back, our peace back, our simple freedom to exist without fear. David's lies had been exposed, his threats had been neutralized, and the truth had prevailed. Emma's note had saved us all.